Välkomna hit allesammans att besöka och lyssna på vår besökare. Professor Guido Imbens är här. It's a great honor to have you here with us today. Han har gått runt och träffat elever och nu vill vi höra lite om hans egen skoltid, om hans väg mot ekonomi och statistik och sådana frågor, och hans pris naturligtvis, hur det kan vara användbart. Så vi lyssnar. So, happy to have you here, and we of course like to hear something about your path in life and your interest for economy and statistics and things like that, and your memories perhaps from your school and so on, and perhaps we can take some questions after that.
Thanks very much for inviting me here. This has certainly been one of the things I was most looking forward to in my visit to Stockholm. So last year, kind of after I got after I was told about the Nobel Prize, at some point they told me they like to have these high school visits, and so I did one last December. But because of the pandemic, that was online, and so that was obviously much less interesting than doing this in person. But kind of inspired by that, when I went back to the Netherlands last summer, I actually went back to my own high school, and that was just really a lot of fun. I just had a very exciting day there. And the nice thing was they were actually still in the same building where I'd been to high school, and they're not going to be there much longer. They were about to tear it down. But so now I could actually still talk to the students, and I could tell them I'd walked the same hallways, I'd been in those same classes, and things didn't always go perfect for me there either. In fact, kind of they had a couple of people talk a little bit about the times when I was there, and in particular they had my old economics teacher talk about that, and there was a episode that at the time certainly was not quite viewed as favorably. So I was banned from class for a while. In economics in particular. So I was taking this economics class, and I got into basically into an argument with the teacher about I'll spare you the exact details, but for 3 weeks I was not allowed in class there. And then it was only at some point that the head of the school found me wandering the hallways and asked what I was doing there, why I wasn't in class. He said, well, I was not allowed in class, so I didn't really have any choice. And then it got sorted out. But the point I'm trying to make is that I wasn't necessarily a model student in those days, and I didn't do well in all the different areas. But I learned an enormous amount at the high school in the end, and I matured some, and things worked out in the end eventually. So the other thing I want to talk a little bit about is that, so you may look kind of at these people who do well and sort of have these achievements, and you may think that things go well for them kind of all along the way. And that's not really the right way to look at it. Kind of, first of all, people who do so well often just have an enormous amount of luck. There's just a lot of, you can do all the hard work you do, but you just need, there's a lot of good fortune in doing so well. And I just want to give a couple of examples there. One of the things that worked out very well for me was I started collaborating with a colleague of mine in my first job at Harvard University with George Angrist, with whom I shared the prize in economics. But it almost didn't work, because when I was applying for a job there, George actually didn't like my work, and he actively opposed the university hiring me because he thought the work was no good. And so it turned out he was wrong, and it would have been very unfortunate for him if I hadn't actually gone there. but it was kind of, there was a lot of luck involved. He was actually probably right that the work I was doing at the time wasn't all that interesting. But when I got there and we started talking together and we started working together, that actually it turned out we did have good complementarities. We had things where it was actually very helpful to work together, and that led to very interesting work. So kind of one thing to take from that is don't let the first impressions deceive you there, but also just be a little humble that even if things go very well, that probably it wasn't just skill, it wasn't just doing everything right, but it was also a lot of good fortune. And so, similarly, my colleague and good friend Josh Angers' path to even getting to graduate school was very roundabout. He dropped out of high school because he was not enjoying himself there, and he started working for a while. He worked for a while in a nursing home, and at some point he realized that actually that wasn't really going to be a very fulfilling long-term path, because it was a lot of work. It was very hard work, and so he decided to go back to high school, and then he decided to then he went into the Israeli army for 2 years. Before he actually went to college and on to graduate school. So there's kind of a lot of different paths you can take to becoming an academic, to doing great research. And you shouldn't get discouraged if things don't necessarily go your way early on. There's lots of opportunities and there's lots of possibilities at various times. But at the same time, from my perspective, my high school days were just incredibly important. They were very formative in how I started thinking about society, about what I wanted to do. I wasn't really that sure initially I wanted to do economics, but I was good in math, but I wanted to do something that was more relevant for society than doing pure math. So I ended up doing econometrics, kind of. It's essentially economics with a lot of statistics and mathematics thrown in, and that turned out to be a very good choice from my perspective. I can keep talking for a bit, but actually I would love to get some questions from you guys, sort of what you guys think about things. I can talk a little bit more about my actual work, but I'd love to get some questions from you guys about what you want to hear me talk about. So what do you want me to? Do people want me to talk a little bit more directly about the work I actually do, or do people want to ask questions? You have a question?
How early do you think results are, like grade-wise, early in life, for later on jobs and academics?
So I think when I grew up, and kind of similarly, kind of with Josh Angers for the experience, I think grades were not all that important at that time. I think unfortunately things, certainly in the US system that I'm now more familiar with, it's kind of harder for me to judge exactly how things are, say, in Holland or here. But there in the US, grades clearly have gotten more important to the point that sort of both parents and students obsess over that more than they should. And it's sort of partly in the US system, it's hard to get into good colleges, and to get into good colleges, it's important to get into good high schools, it's important to get into good elementary schools, to the point that even in kindergarten people start worrying about it. The funny story there is sort of when my oldest, he's not here, so I can embarrass him with this story without him being upset. But he was in kindergarten or preschool. Preschool is what it was. he bit one of the fellow students. Now it's very bad in the US, and so the schools have all these protocols, and so there was a report sent to all the parents that there was a biting incident, that someone had bitten someone else, so all the kids were kind of talking about this, so it wasn't really clear who'd done it, but it was our son who'd done this, and then we were worried. I said, well, but if he's bitten someone, he's not going to get, the teachers are not going to recommend him for a good elementary school, and then he's not going to get into good high school, then he's not going to get in a good college, and he's never going to amount to anything, because that was a little excessive. And so it's hard, it's easy to obsess over grades, and it's, you know, in the end, and at least within the US system, the schools and the colleges kind of try to push back on that and try to get the students to do interesting things outside of school and to kind of show creativity, show interest, show ambition, and not obsess over grades, because it has a lot of, leads to very bad incentives where students take easy classes just so they can get better grades. So unfortunately it is important, but it's often not as important as people think it is. And I deal more with graduate admissions than with undergraduate admissions, and we pay far more attention to what students have done other than their classes than the grades they actually get. Yes?
Did you ever get discouraged when people did not like your work? And if so, how did you get past that?
Yes. There many times I got discouraged. So one of the times was when I was in graduate school. This was in the US, and I just didn't feel like I was doing interesting things. I didn't feel like I was very good at it. I didn't feel like I was making progress. So I actually started applying for jobs. So that I was thinking to not finish my PhD program, but just start looking for jobs outside of academics. And in fact, so I was in the US at the time, and so I found a job advertisement where they looked for someone who had a master's degree in economics, which I just finished at that time, and they wanted someone who was fluent in Dutch. And growing up in the Netherlands, I was fluent in Dutch, so I thought actually that job was perfect for me. But then I didn't get interviewed for that, and so that didn't go anywhere. So I ended up deciding to just stay in graduate school for lack of better options, and so it still worked out. But there's lots of discouraging parts in academic careers, because what I do most of the time is I do research, I write papers, and then I send them to journals. And then most of the time they send them back and say, no, we're not going to publish that. We don't like it. We don't think it's good enough. And so you get, it's very discouraging. And you may think that sort of now at this stage in my career, that's actually easy, and it's easy for me to get things published. But the first 5 papers I got back after winning the Nobel Prize were all rejections. And so it's very hard at any stage of your career in academics, and how do I deal with it? I complain to my friends, and they commiserate with me, and then you kind of just get back up, dust yourself off, and you keep going. You kind of need to work on things you think that are interesting, and at some level some of the best work I've done was heavily criticized early on. It was a paper I was very proud of, I was very happy with, and again, the way the system works is you submit a paper to a journal, and then they get anonymous referees writing reports on this. And I remember this one reviewer writing that they thought this paper of mine was so bad it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. Now that was a little harsh. That was very harsh, and I still remember that very vividly, and it really hurt me. And now I'm editing one of those journals, and make sure that people don't write reports that are quite that harsh, because I think it really upsets people, and rightly so. But it's you have to find others to share this with, and can realize you're not the only one getting negative feedback, and it would be nice if people were a little bit more constructive, but you have to find a way of dealing with that. And you know, the economics profession in that sense has often been not particularly friendly and not particularly constructive. And that's not a good thing. It's one of the things I'm trying to change. Yes?
Could you tell us more about your work?
Sure. So most of my research is, so in economics often we can't do experiments. That's kind of, it's just, you know, unlike in medical settings where the Food and Drug Administration in the US requires drug companies to do experiments to kind of separate the snake oil from real drugs that work. In economics, often we can't do experiments. It would be great to figure out what the causal effect is of a good high school education, how important a good high school education is. But we can't do kind of a drug type trial where we say, well, we're going to split this class into 2 parts, and you guys get a good high school education, and you guys get nothing. And then 10 years later, we're going to look and see how well people do. And now we know for sure that a high school education is actually really important. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Why does it not work? Well, it would not be fair to the people who didn't get the education just to allow us to learn what the value of that is. So we need to find other ways of learning from data to figure out what the value of a high school or a college education is. And simply comparing people who have a college education with people who chose not to have a college degree obviously doesn't work. These people may be different in lots of other ways. They may not have enjoyed the studying as much, and they may have done worse irrespective of making that choice. And so teasing apart the correlation we see, say, between earnings and having a college degree from actually the causal effect of going to college, of getting more education. That's kind of what I work on. And so most of my own work kind of is on developing new methods for making that possible. But then sometimes I work with people trying to actually implementing these methods, and other people implement these methods to figure out kind of what causal effects of that type are for looking at public policy. So for example, and that's kind of one of my more applied papers, we were interested in what the effect of having a universal basic income would be. And again, it would be very hard to do a randomized experiment where we say, well, you guys are going to get a universal basic income for the next 20 years, and sorry, you guys don't. That would, again, not be viewed as fair. That would be very hard. It would be incredibly expensive to do. So what we did is we went to the lottery in Massachusetts and surveyed the people who won the lottery. And so if you win the lottery there, instead of getting $500,000, you would get a check for $25,000 every year for 20 years. So it's kind of very much like a universal basic income. It's not quite guaranteed forever, it's just for 20 years, but it's kind of a long time. And it's coming from the lottery, it's not coming from the government. That may be a little different, and it's only for people who play the lottery. They may be a little different from people who don't play the lottery. But we can kind of do a lot of additional things. And the fact that at least there was some randomization, who wins the lottery, given that you buy a ticket, that's really pretty much random. They televise these things, and so these people were comparable to the people who didn't win but also played the lottery. And so that allowed us to kind of figure out that, in fact, these people who won the lottery, they worked a little less. They might retire a little earlier, but they didn't really stop, most of them didn't stop working. And we could estimate very precisely what the effect would be on a variety of outcomes, in particular on how much people would actually work. And so kind of in lots of other settings, we're trying to look at that type of thing. We're trying to look at the causal effects that are important for government policies, for public policy. And we're trying to do that in settings where we can't directly randomize the things we would like to do, that we would do in a drug trial, but we need to use observational data, what we call observational data, in clever ways. Any other questions there?
How did you react when you got told you were going to win the prize? Or like, was it expected or?
No. So you know, it's a funny thing where it's like one of these major moments where your life kind of changes. But sort of most of these other moments, like having kids, you see that coming at least 9 months before. And sort of here, you don't see that coming. So you go to bed. You know, it's in California, so you go to bed, and then at 2 in the morning, you get a telephone call on my phone. You know, I had this on this night setting, so it doesn't ring the first time it gets called, because I don't really want to get calls in the middle of the night. But the setting is such that if they call again, it does actually ring. And so then the second time I did get the call, and then it's kind of you take a very deep breath, because kind of they tell you, well, congratulations, you won this prize, and so you have half an hour, and then we need you to call into this press conference and kind of then brace yourselves, because there's going to be a lot of people calling you, and your life's going to change for a while. And so it's very exciting. It was very exciting last year, because all 3 of my kids were still at home. My oldest is now in college, but so they were all home, so partly because of the pandemic. And so I was very excited to celebrate that with my kids, other than kind of most of that first day was just, I was in a daze, because there was just constant calls coming in and people needing to talk to me and stuff. But it was very exciting. It was just really an incredible experience.
Any final message or advice to our students, or perhaps to our teachers, how to create interest in your subjects or something?
That's, you know, some of these questions are a little challenging. So kind of just in general, so over the last year, I've had to do a lot of things that I wasn't used to doing. Probably actually the most challenging thing was I had to give the high school commencement address at my son's high school, and so that was a particularly challenging thing, because of course I couldn't say anything that would embarrass my son, but I also had to say something that the teachers would be okay with. I had to say something that the parents would be okay with, because we have more kids in the school. And so, you know, one of these things is also that I get asked about a lot of things that I don't really know much about. And I sort of seen that before. Years ago, a colleague of mine, when I was at Berkeley, won the Nobel Prize in economics, and I had dinner with him later with a couple of other people, and we asked what he'd been up to. And he said, well, he'd been to South Korea. And he said, well, what did you do there? I said, well, I had dinner with the finance minister. I said, well, what did you talk to him about? He said, well, you know, I gave him some advice on monetary policy. And we said, but Dan, you know nothing about monetary policy, because he was an econometrician like me. And he said, well, you know, that's kind of right. But he asked me, so what do I say? And so I don't necessarily feel particularly well equipped kind of to give you guys advice. Other than kind of what I said before, I said some people kind of just try to plan things way ahead, and try to kind of have a very clear plan about what they're going to do, what careers they want to take. And sometimes they do that and it works out. I didn't do that. In my case, it was much more that occasionally opportunities came up, and there were choices I could make, and I do feel I was lucky in that I was ready at the time some of those choices came up, that I could make a choice, and I was willing to make a choice and take a risk. So, as I said, I went to England kind of after a couple of years in college, and I wasn't as part of a grand plan, but I was because it seemed like an interesting opportunity, and it greatly broadened my horizons, and that was a really precious thing. So probably if there's any advice, kind of just do broaden your horizons. There's a lot of complicated things going on in the world, and kind of understanding other people's perspectives and seeing why other people do things differently is going to be incredibly valuable. And the best way to do that is immerse yourself in other communities, in other cultures, and seeing why things are different there, why that may be very reasonable, and why that seems reasonable from the perspective of these other communities. And for me, that was just an incredible experience. And having been able to do that multiple times, going to other countries, has just been very valuable.
You have for sure noticed that the weather in Stockholm differs a little bit from what you are used to in California, I think. And I think the Students' Council have something to say, of course, to the weather.
Yes, we would just like to thank you for visiting us here at Östra Gymnasiet. We hope you had a good time, and we have prepared a small gift from the Student Union to you and your kids, and it is a limited edition piece from our very own merch store, and I hope you like it. Thank you.